21 days Srimad Bhagavatam reading challenge. Our today's speaker is an initiated disciple of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and has been practitioner and teacher of Bhakti Yoga since 1973. Mataji's primary work has been in the area of education. Mataji has developed and taught numerous courses for primary, secondary, college, and adult learners in a wide variety of spiritual and practical subjects. Mataji is author of Dr. Best Learn to Read, an 83 book literacy program, and the Great Mantra for Mystic Meditation. On behalf of ISKCON Bhagavad Mahavidyalaya North America, I'd like to welcome our today renowned speaker, Her Grace Urmila Devi Dasi. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharni Nirasesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Satarni. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadvadutam Padijana Sahita Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Panchakalpachubhischa Kipasnabhya Bachapatitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavino Namaha. So today is June 8th, 2024, and we're going to be looking at the story of Ajamila as told in the 6th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapters 1, 2, and 3. When I got the Gayatri mantras from Srila Prabhupada in Philadelphia in 1975, Srila Prabhupada that morning gave a class on the 6th canto, which was not yet published. And I remember that the devotee was reading the verses from the manuscript. Just trying to get the right angle here, okay. And he said that Ajamila called out 3 times, Narayana, 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 and Prabhupada said, no, what is this 3 times? He said, I did not say 3 times. He said, just 1 time is sufficient, Narayana. That was a very wonderful class. So, of course, this is a very famous story from the Bhagavatam, and within this story are some very important verses. So I thought first we would just kind of run through the entire story rather quickly, and then go back and look at some main points that we would like to focus on. So it starts out with Maharaj Parikshit. He's just heard the description of the universe, and he says, you've described everything in the universe, and I want to know especially, how are people avoiding going to hell? That this doesn't sound very nice. I don't want anybody going there. How can we keep anybody from going to hell? And so Sukadeva Goswami says, well, if you haven't atoned for your sinful activities before you die, then you're going to have to go to hell. In other words, atonement means that you voluntarily punish yourself, essentially. That's what it means. So you've done something wrong, and you voluntarily take up some austerity as prescribed in the scriptures to make up for it, and then you don't have to be punished by the universal government. So something like, if I steal $100 from you, and then I voluntarily give you back that $100, let's say I even voluntarily give you $150 to make up for it, and I cut your lawn and I bake you a cake, and so then you might drop the charges with the government. You might say, okay, well, we don't need to file charges with the government because I'm already satisfied that Urmila has made up for her crime against me. So this is the way that atonement works. But Sukadeva Goswami says, well, okay, that'll work for those particular sins, but it's not going to keep people from sinning again. It's just not going to work. And we see this. We see that people have bad habits or difficulties. Maybe we are struggling with something, and we'll do it again. We'll say, I'm not going to do it again, and then we do it again. And Arjuna brings up this problem, of course, in the Bhagavad Gita. So he says, it'll just come up again. And then Sukadeva Goswami says, well, yes, that's true. Of course, anyway, we'll go back to this. He said, so that's true. He said, karma cannot get rid of karma. because it doesn't get rid of the desires in the heart. So if you can't just get rid of bad karma by doing good karma, because the desires will still be in the heart. Then he says you should do austerity. He lists a bunch of austerity, but then he says again, this isn't going to change your desire for sin. So really what you have to do is you have to dedicate yourself to Krishna. You have to surrender completely to Krishna. And he says in this regard, there's an instructive story. So he starts telling the story. He says how Ajamila fell from Brahminical life. He tells the story in brief. He says Ajamila fell from Brahminical life. He marries a prostitute. He gets attached to his son, Narayana. And because of that, he is saved. And then he starts actually telling the story more completely. Actually, the Yamadutas are the ones who tell the story. So he's saying that Ajamil's there on his deathbed, and he cries out Narayana. And as he sees the Yamadutas, so the Yamadutas come, he's on his deathbed, he's dying. The Yamadutas come, they start dragging him out of his body. And as he's being dragged out of his body, he feels completely helpless. And he calls for his youngest son, Narayana. And as soon as he does that in complete helplessness, boom, 4 Vishnu Dutas show up. And the Yamadutas, they're like, well, who are you? You're beautiful. You're amazing. You're incredible. What are you doing here? And the Vishnu Dutas then say, if you're really Yamaraj's servants, then you have to answer me. You have to tell me who's punishable and who's not, and what is dharma. Here you are taking this guy out because he's sent, what are you doing here? They challenged the Yamadutas. And so the Yamadutas then say that dharma comes from the Vedas and God, that there's different kinds of dharma according to your varna and ashram, and that everything that we do in this world is witnessed by the planets and by the demigods. And they say everybody who's within the scope of karma is punishable because you can't stop acting even for a moment. And if you're acting in materialistic life, materialistic consciousness, you're going to perform some sinful activities. So they give this philosophical overview, and then they tell the story of why particularly Ajamila is punishable. They say how Ajamila was a first-class Brahmana, and he was really first class. As they describe Ajamila and his character as a young man, you're thinking, wow, he is just amazing. He is just super. All good qualities, like no faults. And then once on the order of his father, he's going out and he sees a man and a woman who are low class, who are intoxicated, and who are engaging in hugging and kissing and so forth, and sexual behavior. And he becomes completely bewildered by this. And it says he tries to remember the instructions that he shouldn't even see such things. Of course, he's already seen this. And he just can't get her out of his mind. He's contemplating. And eventually he brings her in as a servant to his house. So he wants to have an illicit relationship with her, but he brings her in on the pretext of being a servant. And eventually he leaves his wonderful chaste Brahmana wife, and he doesn't take care of his elderly parents. He gets completely sucked into the relationship with this low-class woman, this unchaste woman, who he basically marries. He has many, many children with her, and he's spending his money on her. He's spending his money on the children. And because he's only trained to do Brahminical activities and he can no longer act as a Brahmana, he doesn't have any legitimate way to maintain himself. So he's engaging in criminal activities to maintain this woman. He's eating her food. He's wasting his time. He's misspending his money. He's misspending his time. He's cheating people. He's doing criminal things to earn his money. He's eating the food of the prostitute, and he is never atoned. He hasn't done anything to atone. Okay, so now the Vishnu Dutas, who it says are expert in logic and argument, they say, you guys don't know what religion is. You're punishing a sinless person. And they really go into the Yamadutas, and they say, you're setting a bad example. You don't know what you're doing. You're really causing a problem. And then they say anyone who has chanted the holy name is not only free from the sins of this life, but of many millions of life. This is the atonement. And they said Ajamila chanted in a helpless condition without any offense. His chanting wasn't pure, but it was not offensive. And not only was he chanting in a helpless condition at the time of death, but ever since his son was born, he was always chanting the name of his son. Narayana, come here. Narayana, take your meals. Narayana, stop hitting your brother or whatever. And that the Lord gives protection to the devotee who calls on him. And they say that as soon as you chant the holy name of the Lord, you're reminded of the Lord's fame, qualities, attributes, pastimes, and paraphernalia. And then they make the point that regular atonement doesn't purify the mind, the same point that, of course, Sukadeva Goswami had made earlier, and Brickett had made earlier. They said just regular atonement doesn't keep the mind from going to sin. But if you chant just a shadow of the name, if you're joking, if you're chanting for entertainment, if you're chanting for music, if you chant while you die suddenly, you've become completely purified in a way that atonement cannot do. That atonement cannot uproot the desires in the heart, but the holy name chanted without offense, even if not pure, but without offense, it burns everything. And after giving this argument, the Vishnu Dutas supersede the power of the Yamadutas, and they actually release Ajamila, the soul and the subtle body of Ajamila, from the ropes of the Yamadutas. And when they do this, then the subtle body of the Ajamila returns back to his gross body, and the Yamadutas leave. So Ajamil then bows. He's back in his body. He can still see the Vishnu Dutas. He bows to the Vishnu Dutas, and as he's about to speak, the Vishnu Dutas immediately, they don't let him say anything. They just immediately leave. Then Ajamil had become pure by hearing this discourse. So when he chanted a shadow of the name, he was not pure, but by hearing this discourse, now he's become pure. And he laments. He starts condemning himself, condemning his life. He's repenting for what he's done wrong. He deeply regrets what he's done wrong. He doesn't make any excuses. He doesn't make any justifications. He doesn't say, oh, it was my prostitute wife's fault. He just laments, and he considers that he's worthy of punishment. But he's very, very happy. Well, even though he's lamenting like this, he's extremely happy. And he says, I must have had this opportunity because of my pious activities in my youth. He said, I can't understand any other explanation except because of my good activities in my youth, I've had this opportunity. And he said, although I was so sinful, the holy name is so much more glorious. And therefore, the holy name has delivered me. He becomes determined not to sin anymore, either externally or mentally. And then he actually leaves. He doesn't hang around his family anymore. He's already an old man. He goes to Hardwar by the Ganga, by Mother Ganga, by the Ganges, and he engages in bhakti yoga. He absorbs his mind fully in Vishnu. And when he's completely purified, when he's mature in his bhakti, again, he sees the same Vishnu Dutas, and he attains his spiritual form, and he goes to Vaikuntha. So meanwhile, while the Yamadutas had left, as soon as the Vishnu Dutas released Ajamil back into his body, the Yamadutas left, and they were very disturbed because this had not happened to them before. They had always, if they were going to if Yamaraj had said, hey, go get this guy, and they went to get him, then that happened. So they go back to Yamaraj, and their Parikit is asking, he said, no one's going to believe this story. No one's going to believe that Yamaraj was foiled. So, can you please explain this? So then Sukadeva Goswami starts describing the conversation between the Yamadutas and Yamaraj when they go back to Yamaraj and they say, you know, okay, what's happened? And a very important discussion here where the Yamadutas say, there has to be one God. There cannot be many gods. We thought you were the God, but obviously you're not, because there was somebody superior to you. And they said, if there's many gods, those many gods are not always going to agree. And because they're not always going to agree, you know, God number one will say, this person should be punished. And God number two will say, no, this person shouldn't be punished. And so what's going to happen? Either the person's going to be both punished and rewarded, or neither. There's just going to be chaos. And they said, so there's got to be one God, and it can't be you. And we want to know, therefore, who it is. And they said, we were taking this Ajamila out of his body, and we saw these agents of Narayana. So Yamaraj is really happy because he's a pure devotee. So he's really happy that his servant said Narayana. He's really happy about that. And yes, he says, you're right. There is one God above me and all the devas. And he describes that this one God is above the senses and the mind. And he describes how wonderful the Lord's servants, the Vishnu Dutas and the Lord's servants in general are. And then he says this very important verse, Dharmam tu Shakshad Bhagavat Pranitam in 6.3.19. And this very important verse in 6.3.20 to 21, the Mahajana verse, where he lists all the Mahajanas, including himself, Narada, Swayambhu, Sambhu, Kumara, Kapilo, Manu. So he says, we know what is actually Dharma. We can actually understand what is Dharma. And then he says the glories of the holy name, again chanted without offense. And he's glorifying the Lord. He's glorifying the holy name. And then he says, look, the devotees, if someone's really a devotee, they don't commit sins. I mean, maybe sometimes they might accidentally, by mistake, commit a sin, but generally they're not going to sin. He said, if someone's a devotee, then they're not going to be committing sins. He said, only bring to me people who are adverse to the Lord, anyone who never chants, anyone who's adverse to the honey of the Lord's lotus feet, anyone who doesn't chant, anyone who doesn't bow down to the Lord. And then Yamaraj laments, he apologizes to the Lord. He says, my dear Lord, I'm responsible for the activities of my servants. And because my servants went to arrest somebody who had chanted your name, I have done something wrong and I apologize. And then it says the Yamadutas, they never go to devotees again. Of course, it's interesting because Ajamila didn't chant Narayana until after he saw the Yamadutas. So the Yamadutas are pulling him out of his body. And at that time, he says Narayana out of fear of the Yamadutas and in helplessness. Okay, so let's go back. And I want to touch on, there's so much here. So let's touch on just a few of these main points. So the first main point, which we have stated both, well, the very, very first main point is that sometimes the answer given by a guru or by an authority is a test rather than the answer. So sometimes there are statements in Shastra or by gurus that are not actually the answer, but it's a test. Or is giving something on a lower level. Just like Krishna tells Arjuna, for one who's been honored, dishonor is worse than death. Then afterwards, he said, be free of the desire for honor and dishonor. So instructions may be given at various levels. It's true that you can get out of going to hell by doing atonement. That is true. Sukadeva Goswami wasn't lying, but it's not the ultimate solution. It's a temporary solution. It's not really solving the actual problem. Just like people who go on a diet and they lose weight and then they just gain it back again because whatever has been circumstantially triggering them to overeat has not been resolved. So it's not that you can't lose weight by diet and exercise, but to maintain a healthy weight, one has to change other things, something in one's mentality, something in one's environment. So many people quit smoking and then start again. So many people quit drinking and then start again. So it's not that it doesn't work, but it's that it doesn't work permanently. So this is something that's said both by Sukadeva Goswami to Pariksit and by Yamaraj to the Yamadutas. All right, then we have the very interesting fact that although Ajamila was very, very qualified, he had a fall down. So here we see that even very qualified people can have a fall down, and it was quite a fall down. And it was a very severe fall down that lasted basically till the end of his life, which got extended. His life got extended by the Vishnu Dutas, but normally he would have died then. So it was quite a severe fall down. And if we look at how Ajamila fell down, even though he was so highly qualified, is we see at least two mistakes that he made. First of all, when he started thinking about this woman, this prostitute woman, there's no record that he went to his guru or his father and asked what to do. He was trying to deal with it completely on his own. The other thing is that he was trying to stop his contemplation. We know from Bhagavad Gita 2:62 and 63 that as we contemplate something, we get more and more attached to it, and eventually we get overwhelmed with lust that we can no longer control for having this thing. Lust means you don't care about the consequences. So Ajamila tried to stop his contemplation and attachment when he could tell his contemplation was going to the attachment level, and he tried to stop it, but he tried to stop it by trying to stop it. He was trying to stop, I'm not supposed to do this. I'm not supposed to do this. I'm not supposed to do this. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. And I'm sure we've all had experience that when there's something that we know we're not supposed to do, that trying to stop it in that way it tends to be ineffective. In fact, it can even make the desires stronger because we're simply meditating in an adverse way on the same thing. I'm not going to eat that piece of cake in the refrigerator. I'm not going to eat that piece of cake. No, I'm not supposed to eat that cake in the refrigerator. I already had enough to eat. Why should I eat that cake? It's just whatever it may be. If we're just constantly meditating on it, then the desire, it actually intensifies, because whether you're meditating on something positively or negatively doesn't really matter. So what should Ajamila have done? This is a very important question, because in 2024, unless you are living in a cave in the Himalayas, we are all going to see the kind of thing Ajamila saw if you're interacting in the world at all. If you just go shopping, practically, even if you just go shopping online, you're going to see advertisements coming up. It just, like, how are you going to avoid seeing this kind of thing, seeing people engaged in sexual behaviors in a very shameless way? It's everywhere. It's just everywhere. You're going to see pictures in the shoe shops. It's insanity. So what are we going to do? We're going to be exposed to so many things. So the advice given in the Bhagavad Gita in 264, right after Krishna gives the fall down sequence in 262 and 263, is that we should be neutral in attachment and aversion. And then later in 270 said that we should deal with desires like rivers going into the ocean, which is always being full but remains the same. The point is to just look at these desires and thoughts from the point of view of neutrality. Instead of trying to stop the thoughts and desires, we detach ourselves from them. We don't identify with them. We neither try to fulfill them or identify with them, nor do we try to repress them and make them go away. We simply just don't pay attention to them. And we can compare this, I compare this often to you're walking down the street, and as you're walking down the street, you have someplace you're going, and you're going to pass so many people, maybe animals, and you're aware of them. You obviously don't want to bump into them, but you're not paying much attention to them. Some are old, some are young, some are skinny, some are fat, some are men, some are women, some are dressed nicely, some are not dressed nicely, whatever. Where there's so many shop windows with so many things, but if you have your destination in mind, these things come in and out of your awareness. Like a person you pass by on the street and they come into your awareness and then they go out of your awareness, and actually you're hardly aware of them at all. So our thoughts and feelings and desires on the material level should be like this. And it's interesting to me that more and more people are trying to practice this in the world, generally in a Buddhist way in modern society, with the idea of mindfulness, where you just become the observer of your thoughts, feelings, and desires. Of course, in the modern way, in the Buddhist way, they say that ultimately even you, the observer, doesn't exist. Whereas in Bhakti Yoga, we detach ourselves and become the observer of the thoughts, feelings, and desires of the body and mind. And then we focus on the thoughts, feelings, and desires of the spiritual, which Ajamil did not do. So although he was a Brahmana, although he was engaged in worshiping the Lord, he obviously had not really cultivated his inner life of thoughts, feelings, and desires related to the Lord. He had good qualities and he was engaged externally in the behaviors of a Brahmana, but he hadn't internalized. He didn't have a superior or higher taste. So that's the next thing we learn from his fall down. Then the next lesson we learn here is how the Yamadutas are saying that if you're engaged in karma, you're going to do sinful activities. It's basically not possible if one is engaged in materialistic activities to be completely, totally 100% pious. We have this example of King Riga, who was incredibly pious and still did something sinful without even knowing it. So just trying to be a good person is not going to be sufficient to make us happy in this world. Okay, our next point I want to look at is how the Vishnu Dutas are expert in logic and argument. And so are the Yamadutas, actually. This whole conversation is quite interesting because the Vishnu Dutas first, they're just there at first. Before they release Ajamila, they say, hey, tell us why you're doing what you're doing. It's like they're giving the Yamadutas a chance. Maybe they do know what they're doing. And when the Yamadutas tell their story, then the Vishnu Dutas say, hey, that's not right. They're actually expert and they can defeat the Yamadutas. And first they defeat them through argument and through Shastra and logic and reason before they actually take Ajamila. It's also very significant and is repeated throughout this story that the holy name chanted as an abbas, as a shadow or a reflection. It doesn't have to be chanting in the level of love, but it cannot be chanted offensively in order to give the results that are being glorified here. I was just hearing Srila Prabhupada say this morning. Offensive chanting, he says, will give happiness and distress in this world, but it will not give anything spiritual. That the idea of offensive chanting is that eventually it will lead you to this Nam Abbas. And Nam Abbas can be, for a sadhaka, the stage of clearing out offenses, or Nam Abbas can happen circumstantially, as it's said here by the Vishnu Dutas, where they say, if you're chanting for musical entertainment, if you're chanting as a joke, oh, look at those Hare Krishnas over there. If you chant, in some kind of dangerous situation. So this story is very important in terms of if someone is sinning on the strength of chanting, the glorification of the name in this story doesn't apply. So if somebody's saying, well, okay, if I just chant one time Narayana, I'll become free from all sins and I'm going to go back to Godhead. And so I'm going to knowingly perform sins. I'm going to leave my wife and leave my older parents and, lie and cheat and steal and so forth, but I'll just keep chanting Narayana, and that's not going to work. Ajamila wasn't thinking like that at all. It was innocent on his part. So this doesn't apply to intentionally, Krishna doesn't do that. He doesn't play that game, isn't that you can't use the holy name like that. And sometimes that's considered the worst offense. And the point is made again here that only association with the Lord is going to change the desires. And here is the point, that the main thing that genuine bhakti does is it changes our desires. One should not think that bhakti is like mundane atonement. One should not think that bhakti is just some ritualistic process. That's also an offense. What bhakti is doing when done properly is it's getting to the root of all sin, which is our rebellion against the Lord. And once one stops rebelling against the Lord, then all the desire, the essential thing that causes all these other external sins, the symptoms of rebelling against the Lord naturally go away. Just like today, I was weeding in the garden, you pull out the weed by the roots and then the whole weed dies, where if you just cut off the leaves, it'll probably grow back. So bhakti is pulling out the root because it's reconnecting us with service to the Lord in a very, very blissful way. So it's also significant that the Vishnu Dutas don't just come and release Ajamila. Ajamila says, Narayan, and they don't just come and just break the ropes of the Yamadutas. Immediately. They have this whole discussion. So why is that? Well, there's many reasons. First of all, it was this discussion that really transformed Ajamila. Ajamila, just by his Namabhas chanting, wasn't yet qualified to go to the spiritual world. So this conversation transformed him. And as he says, just this one moment's association with these devotees. So he needed that. He needed this association of devotees. He needed to hear from the devotees. And I'm sure it wasn't intellectual. I'm sure it was very experiential. I'm sure it was a very dramatic experience on a deep emotional level for him. Another reason this conversation took place was that the Vishnu Dutas were instructing the Yamadutas. And then they're going to hear this instruction again repeated by Yamaraj. So the Vishnu Dutas are caring about the Yamadutas. The Yamadutas, although they're hideous beings, they have a desire to have other people be afraid of them. They're very pious beings, actually. They're servants of Yamaraj, and they're very much devoted to Dharma in the universe. I'm sure we've all met people who really want to go around punishing anyone who does something wrong. And then you could become Yamadutas if you want. So the Yamadutas are in many ways very qualified. And so the Vishnu Dutas wanted to help them and instruct them. And then, of course, this conversation is also there for the benefit of you and me, who can read about it in the Bhagavatam so many thousands or millions of years later. The next really significant thing here is the repentance of Ajamila and even the repentance of Yamaraj. So a devotee of the Lord never has the mentality that because I'm a devotee and the Lord frees me from sin, therefore I have a free ride. I mean, that's the sinning on the strength of chanting mentality. And they don't have that mentality either. Like before they're released, you could say, like Ajamila wasn't chanting Narayana for the purpose of getting free from sin, nor at any time. It's not the mentality of the devotee. The mentality of the devotee, if the devotee has done something wrong, either before becoming a devotee or after becoming a devotee, they repent. Prabhupada says that the devotee's sinful activities are burned up in the fire of repentance. Neither Ajamila nor Yamaraj say, I'm a victim, it wasn't my fault, I didn't know what I was doing. No excuses, no justification. They take full 100% responsibility. And they say, yes, I've done something wrong. And then Ajamila feels that he needs to not only just say something's wrong, he has to make a change. And you could say he does atonement, but he's not doing atonement in the sense of using one fruit of activity to counteract another fruit of activity. He's doing atonement in the sense that he actually starts seriously performing bhakti, not only with his body, but with his mind. He leaves his whole family situation, right? He goes to a sacred place, and then he's fully fixing his mind on the Lord. So this is how devotees should respond when they've done something wrong. And he's willing to be punished. Ajamil is not, and we find this consistently in the Bhagavatam, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. If a devotee does something wrong, they take full responsibility, no excuses, no justification. They are perfectly willing to be punished. And they take up themselves some sort of penance and austerity to purify themselves in bhakti, not separately from bhakti, but within bhakti. They do something to rectify themselves. Okay, the next most important point is the discussion that the Yamadutas have. And this section of the Bhagavatam particularly, I'm not sure if there's any other, in fact, really establishes why there must be one God. So anybody with any intelligence and observational skills can understand that there is some intelligence behind the creation and maintenance of this world. That, I mean, to say that everything is random chance without any intelligence, I don't know. I just can't see how any reasonably observant and intelligent person can reach such a conclusion. But how do we know there's one God? You know, there's many cultures that say, yes, there's intelligent design and there's intelligent maintenance, but it's done by a whole group of gods who all take care of different things. And I thought it was so insightful of the Yamadutas. Until that point, they thought Yamaraj was the Supreme Lord. And we find a similar thing in the Bhagavatam, earlier in the Bhagavatam, where Narada thought Brahma was the Supreme Lord. And they give a very logical reason of why there can't be many gods. They say, now we know it's not you anymore because your order was superseded by a higher power. We didn't have the Vishnu Dutas overpowered us. And they said, if there's more than one God, this is very important. They're not always going to agree. We're not always going to agree with everybody else. Even in the spiritual world, not all the pure devotees always agree about how to serve Krishna. That even if you're highly qualified, you're not always going to agree. This is a symptom of being a person. So the Yamaduta's point is, if there's many gods, they're not always going to agree. We have this situation in our Hare Krishna movement. Somebody does something wrong, and one person says, oh, that person should be punished. And another person says, no, they shouldn't be punished. And this is exactly what the Yamadutas say will happen. That person A will say, oh, this person should be punished. Person B will say, no, this person shouldn't be punished. So then what will happen? If all these gods have equal authority and equal power, then the person doing the wrong thing will get punished by God A and rewarded by God B. Or God A and God B will just fight about it, and so the person won't get either punished or rewarded. And so the Yamadutas are saying this is going to be chaos. A very good argument why there has to be one supreme God, why we can't have just many competing gods. And then, of course, Yamaraj gives these wonderful verses that real Dharma comes from God, similar to what the Yamadutas said. But the Yamadutas were talking about subordinate Dharma when they spoke to the Vishnu Dutas. When they said all Dharma comes from the Vedas and from God, they were talking in terms of Varnashram. What's your duty as a Vaishya? What's your duty as a Shudra? What's your duty as a married woman? What's your duty as a married man? What's your duty as a child? What's your duty as a parent? They weren't talking about transcendent Dharma. And here Yamaraj is talking about transcendent Dharma. So both mundane Dharma and transcendent Dharma comes from God. And then he says, Swayambhu Narada Sambhu, Komara Kapila Manu, Pralada Janaka Bhisma, Balim Vyasakir Vayam. We 12 people, we know what is actually Dharma. We know the transcendent Dharma. And that is ultimately loving service to the Lord. And then he says, those who love the Lord, they don't do sins, right? The Apichet Sutracharo verse doesn't mean that you can have somebody going around, raping and burning and stealing and killing and going to church and that they're a devotee. You may say, well, if this person is going to church and worshiping God, that we respect that he's doing that or she's doing that. But still, that person should be punished. I was just hearing a class where Prabhupada says that even if you're a bhakta, even if you're a devotee, that if you're committing sins willingly daily, that still you have to be punished. So Yamaraj is saying that we're talking about here a real devotee. Maybe by mistake or circumstance, they may do something wrong, but if they do that, they're not to be punished. That if someone even one time really sincerely surrenders to the Lord, that person is now under the Lord's protection, not under Yamaraj's protection. So we've just done a real run through. This was, of course, very fast, and we could talk about this for months, literally, going through all these verses. So I don't know if you have time for questions or how you work this. So.
Yes, Mataji. Thank you very much for your wonderful class and walking us through. So yeah, devotees, if you have any question, please raise your hand and unmute yourself, please. Yes, Prabhu, you can unmute yourself.
Okay. Then with Pranam Mataji and everyone. I have a question regarding 12 Mahajanas. Are these 12 Mahajans subject to the 4 defects we conditioned souls have? Brahm Pramad, Vipraleksa, and Karna Pato. Are they, because I understand from Ajamila Akhyan that Yamaraj had this mistake of not instructing about Bhagavad Dharma to his Yamadutas. And that's where the whole episode happened.
So I don't think, first of all, yes, they're above the 4 defects. And mistake, Prabhupada defines mistake in this connection as accidental sin. That's in Ishopanishad Mantra 18. When we say liberated souls don't make mistakes, we don't mean ordinary mistakes. Like Prabhupada would sometimes call West Virginia New Virginia. He was, trying to say we have New Vrindavan in West Virginia, and sometimes he called it New Virginia. Sometimes Prabhupada quoted a verse wrong. So we're not talking about that. Prabhupada wrote a letter to a Treya Rishi that sometimes Krishna sees Radharani and starts to milk a bull instead of a cow, and that the gopis will, put their clothes on wrongly, even, so we're not talking about that kind of mistake. Why hadn't he instructed them? Because they hadn't asked. And that's not a mistake. That's proper behavior. One is not supposed to preach above somebody's adhikar or somebody's interest. So until this incident happened with these particular Yamadutas, I'm sure there's a lot more Yamadutas than these, but until this particular incident happened with these particular Yamadutas, they hadn't had curiosity about it. They thought they already knew Dharma. They were looking at Dharma from a mundane perspective, which is, again, true. It's just not the truth. And they had no reason to ask. So a good teacher waits until the student has a desire. Because if someone doesn't have a desire, nothing you teach is going to stay anyway. So that's not a mistake by any means. That's a very good example about how one should behave with subordinates.
I heard senior devotees take in the lectures, these are recorded, and they have made this accusation that Yamaraj had committed this mistake of not informing the Yamadutas about Bhagavad Dharma, that at the last point of life, somebody...
he sort of sees himself like that. He says at the end, this is my fault. These are my servants, and I didn't take care of them properly, and for this I repent. So I can see why somebody would say that. because Yamaraj himself, in one sense, says that. He says, I had a duty to these beings that I didn't do properly. But on the other hand, he didn't do it because they weren't ready. They hadn't inquired. Now they had this dramatic experience. It was a very dramatic experience. And because they had this experience, they're now asking. By the way, you'll see throughout the Gita and the Bhagavatam that the speaker only talks about what's asked. Like Sukadev Goswami will say, now I've answered your questions. And he stops. Now, what Sukadev Goswami will do, and not only Sukadev Goswami, Maitreya Rishi, and so forth, is they will put in statements that induce questions. They'll say, you know, the cowherd boys didn't talk about the killing of Aghasura for a year. Or, you know, Sati left her body because she was offended by her father. They'll make these statements in their narration, which are likely to provoke questions in their students, in their hearers. They'll create what we would call a cliffhanger or some kind of foreshadowing. But they wait until they have the question before they actually respond. You just see that right across the board. They don't talk about things without some interest. So what we have this saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But then the rest of that is, but you can put salt in his oats. So what we can do as preachers is we can put salt in people's oats. But if they're not thirsty, there's no point in giving them water. Anyway, Yamaraj in his humility sees himself like that, but I don't think he was actually guilty of anything.
Thank you, Mata. Very good.
See, there one more hand raised. Can you please unmute yourself? Please unmute yourself. I don't see the name, but if you can unmute yourself.
Well, the name's there, but it's in Russian.
Oh, Russian. Okay, sorry.
So I don't know how to pronounce it.
Okay, so while we're waiting, so there's one question in the chat also. Is the GBC ISKCON mundane authority or transcendental authority?
I don't know what this question means. I'm not sure what this means.
Yeah, Rachna Mataji, if you want to unmute yourself and elaborate further.
What do you mean by this? Institutional or spiritual? Well, it's a spiritual institution. Well, I don't know why you're making a demarcation like that. And you're going to need to explain what you mean by this. There's some question under this question.
You know, you just, Hare Krishna Mataji. So you just said that, we have to accept one authority and instead of, many competing gods. So I was wondering,
well, the
now
is neither the one God or competing gods. They're not God at all.
Yes, but since Prabhupada is not on the planet, many issues come up about the actual authority. And as you only mentioned that, sometimes issues come up within the leadership about, what is the correct action. So then who is correct? Like, how do you decide who is correct?
It's a very good point. And we see this among any group of devotees. We'll see this, like the Yamadutas are making this point about the demigods even. That you'll get a group of devotees, whether they're GBC or they're whoever they are. And, Bhakti John stole some money. Should he be punished? And somebody will say yes, and somebody will say no. There'll be difference of opinions as to how to deal with something. I'm just thinking, when my father stayed in the Boston Temple in the guest room, when we were living there in the temple many years ago, and he didn't lock his door, and there was somebody visiting who was painting the temple and doing some work at the temple as a volunteer, and he stole my father's wallet. So the temple president got my father's wallet back, but minus the cash. And he didn't insist that this guy give back the cash, and he didn't want to take the matter to the police. And somebody else might have, I mean, my opinion was quite different. I thought that he should get the cash back and report it to the police. I thought he was favoring this guest over my father. And so I wasn't very happy with this decision. So the same kind of thing happened among the GBC members. The GBC will be discussing something and they have different opinions as individual members. That's the case. You're not going to get every member of the GBC to agree all the time. This is the Yamaduda's point, that you're not going to get everybody to agree all the time. The ultimate authority is God. And do you have a practical question in this regard?
No, just basically what you said, that actually it is hard to, in some cases, not possible to have everyone be on the same page about the...
You can't. I mean, Prabhupada wrote this to when Gopal Krishna Maharaj, when he was a householder, Prabhupada wrote this letter to his wife, and he said, you are a devotee, your husband is a devotee, but because you're different people, therefore you have different opinions. That doesn't mean you're not both devotees. So because we're individual persons, we are going to have different opinions on things. I mean, Prabhupada is the Acharya of ISKCON, and therefore when it comes to very important principles that Prabhupada gave us, if we're not going to agree, then we really can't be at least leaders in ISKCON. Prabhupada says 16 rounds. If you're going to say, well, everybody has to chant 25 rounds on Ekadasi, or if you're going to say people can only have to chant 8 rounds. I mean, if you want to say that as an individual member of ISKCON for yourself, that's something else. But if you want to start changing Prabhupada's program as a leader at ISKCON, that's not going to work. We have to have Srila Prabhupada as not only our founder, but as our Acharya. Of course, then we might disagree about what's a principle and what's a detail. So Prabhupada says that requires some intelligence. And therefore, people who are leaders, they may take quite a long time to discuss what is a principle that cannot be changed and what is a detail that not only can be changed, but that must be changed for time, place, and circumstance. And then we do the best we can. And sometimes we do the best we can. And then after some time, we have to adjust. And even Srila Prabhupada himself would do that. He would make a decision, and then after some time, he would adjust it.
So, Mataji, I'm chanting 16 rounds and I'm also following the regulative principles, but I've not taken initiation yet. So what is, and I feel protection even from just doing these basic things. So what is the incentive for me to join ISKCON when there are so many problems with ISKCON? Why should I take that next step of taking initiation into the movement?
Well, first of all, you're not taking initiation into the movement. You're taking initiation into the parampara. Initiation is transcendent to any particular organization. The institution is a mechanism through which the parampara is operating. As Ayendra Prabhu said, it's like the shower head out of which the water flows, or the river bed in which the water is flowing. So you don't, initiation is a transcendent thing. You take initiation into the parampara. And ISKCON is facilitating that, as we're a branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya under Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and under Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that is facilitating your connection with the parampara. So any kind of organization in this world is going to have problems. So I'm going to answer two questions. Why should you take initiation, and why be a member of ISKCON? Why to take initiation? Because that's your commitment to the Lord, after which he makes a commitment to you. It's just like Prabhupada says, initiation is like enrolling in a university, as opposed to just auditing classes. So, you can sit in on the classes as a non-enrolled student, and you can get a lot of knowledge and you can get a lot of benefit, but you will not get the full shelter and protection of the university. And there's no guarantee that you're going to get a degree, and in fact, you probably won't. But once you enroll in the university, then the university can promise you that if you follow, XYZ rules and take these courses and do this work, you will graduate. The admissions officer who enrolls you in the university, as soon as that person enrolls you in the university, then the dean of the university guarantees that if you follow everything, you will graduate. And then all the professors and all the departments will be there to help you. So you may be enrolled in the School of Engineering, but the School of Mathematics will also help you, and the School of Biology will also help you. You'll have full access to the library. You'll have full access to everything in the school. So once you're accepted by a Diksha Guru, who's like your admissions officer, then the dean of the college, who's God, is going to guarantee that you graduate as long as you follow. And then everyone in the Parampara, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, Narada Muni, they're all there to help you, as anybody in the school is there to help you. And without that commitment on your end, why should Krishna make a commitment on his end? As far as why be a member of ISKCON, if you're inspired by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, then in my humble opinion and experience, ISKCON is the best way to connect with him. Now, some people may have a different opinion. Some people may feel that there's another organization in which you can connect better with our A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and they're entitled to their opinion. But this is the organization that Srila Prabhupada founded, and I see that connecting with Srila Prabhupada through his institution is very easy. Are there problems in the institution? Of course there are. But then you have a choice, you can try to be Krishna conscious completely on your own without any help and any association. For most people, that is impossible. Prabhupada said it's a great hallucination. Maybe somebody can do it, but I haven't met anybody, and we're very much enjoying to take up sadhu sangha. So as soon as you take up any kind of sangha, some of those people in that sangha may be rotten. You may say, well, I'm not going to be involved in the institution. I'm just going to have some group of, 5 devotees, and we'll gather together separate from an institution. And one of those 5 people may turn out to be criminal. I mean, it's the way the material world is, especially in Kali Yuga. So if becoming a pure devotee on your own is basically impossible, and we need help from others, then every time you're going to be part of any group, there's going to be problematic individuals in those groups. There's going to be difficulties. I mean, that's just life. It just is. And then do the best you can to choose the individuals within that organization that enliven you in your Krishna consciousness. And if you choose some individuals who later turn out to be, not what you thought or whatever, and then you pick yourself up and you dust yourself off and you go on. And then you do your best. I mean, I've seen a lot of ISKCON, not all of it by any means, but I've been around the world over 20 times, and I've been to dozens and dozens of, I've been to over 1,000 places in the world and dozens of ISKCON temples. And what I see is that there's a significant amount of members of ISKCON who are really serious about achieving Krishna prema. I don't know what the percentage is. My wild, completely unscientific guess is that somewhere around 20% of our members are really, really serious about achieving Krishna prema. And there's just excellent association in the Hare Krishna movement, and full facility to have a link with A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. So, you take the best facility. Just like do you live in America?
Yes, Mataji.
Okay. Does America have problems?
Yes, Mataji.
Do we have crazy leaders?
Yes, Mataji.
Okay, just open up any newspaper any day and you'll read about some crazy leader doing some crazy thing. But are there benefits to living in America?
Yes.
There are. I visited many countries in the world. And there's many benefits to being in the United States. You have to live somewhere. Well, am I going to live in a place where there's no, what, I'm going to live in a boat in international waters? I guess that's an option, right? You could just live on a boat in international waters. You'd have to come to land somewhere sometimes. Be pretty hard to just live in a boat in international waters all the time. And even then you're subject to international law. There's still international law in international water, and maybe you're going to get beset by pirates or something. And you might need the protection of some country. And wherever you live, there's going to be problems. I've been to New Zealand, so New Zealand's a nice country. But it got really wild during COVID. It was like one of the most difficult places to be during COVID, actually. They put heavy restrictions on all of the citizens. So it's just like that. Every place has its problems. So that's an answer as to why you should get initiated. And at least my answer as to why I have stayed in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness.
Thank you very much, Mataji. That was very nice. Thank you. I appreciate your very clear explanations, and I will really consider it very carefully. And I am a follower of Srila Prabhupada. There's no denying.
I mean, in my humble opinion is that the ISKCON is the best place to connect with Srila Prabhupada. Again, there are other Gaudiya organizations that claim that they have a better connection with Srila Prabhupada. And, if somebody feels that way and that's their experience, whatever, that's not mine to judge for individuals. But my own experience is that the best place to connect with Srila Prabhupada, at least now in 2024, is in the institution that he founded. That we recognize, in ISKCON, we recognize Srila Prabhupada as the founder Acharya. And if there are people in ISKCON who deviate from that, generally they get corrected, at least eventually. But you will find a significant number of people, who are really, really devoted to following Krishna consciousness the way that Srila Prabhupada taught in the Hare Krishna. And just, choose your association wisely. That's true everywhere, in everything. It may even be true in your family. Maybe there's some aunt or uncle that you just say hello to at a wedding, but you don't really work with. That's always true. You choose the people who are going to be most enlivening and most helpful to you. And other people who are not, whatever, just respect them from a distance and go. Okay, I think we could take one more because it's starting to be an hour now.
Yes, Nadi.
There was one person
Yes.
figure out how to unmute, or they're still muted.
Please unmute yourself.
Yes, there we go. I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry.
My name is Yulia. Thank you very much. I was listening to this class, and I was just curious about one thing. I'm sorry if it's really ignorant and stupid, and sorry if it's going to be bothering in some way. Or
You're speaking very.
The question is, I thought it was interesting how they both, Yamadutas and Vishnudutas, they were both about the truth, but their truth contradicted each other. So why is that happened to the truth? Isn't it that truth must be always one? And
no, it was different levels of that they didn't really contradict each other. They were looking at different levels.
Then how does the truth looks like? How does it happen that the highest truth is about spirit, and then it kind of split into different other truths that relate to different material aspects? Is that like that?
Well, think about the material nature and transcendence. Or you can think of also in our practical life. If we're going to say Dharma means what's right, what's authentic, what's good. So we can talk about that materially speaking. What's a good person? A good person, is honest. They don't lie, they don't cheat, they don't steal. And then we can talk about, what's good for a 4-year-old child is going to be different than what's good for a 14-year-old. And that's going to be different from what's good for a 24-year-old. We have different expectations. So that's a level of we're talking about what's good and what's right. Or we can talk about something that Prabhupada talked about a lot, which side of the road you drive on. Prabhupada grew up in India, where everybody drove on the left side of the road. And it was something that really affected him when he came to America and people were driving on the right. And as he was traveling around the world, in some places people drive on the left, some places people drive on the right. So you can say, what's the correct thing to do? Well, it depends. Are you in England or are you in France? That's a certain level of truth. And that's real. It's not that it's not real. You can say, there's different rules for someone who's married and someone who's not married, for someone who has children, someone who doesn't have children. There's different rules depending on what kind of job you have, what's expected of you. We have very different expectations for people who are school teachers and people who are bartenders. So there are different dharmas and different rules that depends on how old you are and what your marital status is and what your job is and where you live. And that's true. It's not that that's not true. But then there's also an ultimate truth that's there for everybody, regardless of circumstance, and that is to love and surrender to God. And those things are not contradictory. They're on different levels. And the Yamadutas, basically, they're working on the lower level. That's where that's the realm in which they're operating on. And in fact, that's what they say to the Vishnu Dutas. They say our realm of jurisdiction is the realm of karma. That's the realm in which we're operating. That's the people that are under our jurisdiction. And what the Vishnu Dutas said is, oh, you didn't realize that this guy wasn't under your jurisdiction anymore. So it wasn't contradictory. It was different perspectives, looking at things differently depending on how you're going to, what considerations are there. And the Vishnu Dutas are talking about something that's transcendent. Now, generally, as Prabhupada writes, and I'm pretty sure it's the purport to Bhagavad Gita 9:30, generally those things parallel each other because they're both given by God. And this is also significant that the Yamadutas, when asked, where does religion come from? They said religion comes from the Vedas and God. So the fact that there's different rules for a 4-year-old and a 24-year-old, those different rules are coming also from the Vedas and from God. That there's different rules for a married person and a renunciate, that's coming from God. And the ultimate rule of surrendering to Krishna and loving Krishna is also coming from God. And so generally, because all of that comes from the Shastra and all of it comes from God, generally they're in harmony with one another. So generally surrendering to God and following the different dharma for your particular circumstance is compatible. Why not? It all comes from the same source. It's all aiming at the same place. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes in order to surrender to God, you may have to do something which is against mundane dharma. Just like the wives of the Brahmanas who left their husbands to go see Krishna, even though without them, their husbands couldn't do the sacrifice. A man has to do the sacrifice with his wife. So they violated mundane dharma in order to follow transcendent dharma. And then you have someone who did the opposite. You have Karna, who violated transcendent dharma in order to follow mundane dharma. That should not be done. If there's a conflict between mundane dharma, Karna was obligated to Duryodhana. That was his mundane dharma. And that is a mundane dharma. We should be grateful. But the transcendent dharma was to say, I don't owe Duryodhana anything. Now I'm going to surrender to Krishna. So when there's a conflict between mundane dharma and transcendent dharma, the transcendent dharma should win. That the Yamadutas didn't understand because they didn't really understand transcendent Dharma. It wasn't their sphere of influence. Does that clarify things, or do you still have a question?
Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting for me to just like to think about. Please accept my obeisances. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji, for this wonderful class. Dear devotees, let's say thanks to Mataji by chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra 3 times. Please unmute yourself. Hare Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare
Krishna
Krishna,
Krishna,
Krishna
Hare
Krishna,
Hare,
Hare
Hare
Ram,
Ram,
Hare Ram,
Ram Ram Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Krishna
Krishna
Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Hare.
Hare,
Hare Ram,
Hare
Hare Ram,
Ram,
Ram
Hare
Ram,
Ram,
Hare
Ram
Hare.
Ram, Hare
Hare
Hare.
Krishna, Krishna
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna,
Hare Hare.
Hare
Hare
Hare,
Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram,
Ram
Hare Hare.
Ram,
Ram,
Hare
Ram,
Hare.
Ram, Hare Hare.
Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
Thank you, Mataji, for wonderful class. Hare Krishna.
Thank you
Jai
very
Shri
much
Krishna.
for inviting me and have me absorb myself in this story of Ajamila for the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mataji. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mataji. Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yeah, sure.
Prabhupada ki jai. Hare
Thank you,
Krishna.
Maharajji.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
Dear devotees, we will see you tomorrow again with another class. Thank you very much for your association. Hare Krishna.
Hare
See you.
Krishna.